Hi, Gold viewers. My name is Reneva Fourie. I'm an activist for social and economic justice. And because of that, I'm a Central Committee member and a Politburo member of the South African Communist Party. I'm very happy to be with you today. My family was relatively normal. I'm an only child. But within the context of South Africa, because a lot of, or most Black people were excluded from the economic system, it could be perceived as if I was born with a silver spoon in my mouth, because both my father and my mother were professionals. And because I was the only child and the eldest grandchild, I was not denied anything. So I grew up with having access to whatever it is that I desired. Um, and it's interesting because that kind of privilege, if, within the South African context, of course, had made the fact that others don't have those contradictions, it made it a whole lot more stark. So because I always had a life of comfort, I was more acutely aware of the discomfort of others, and it from a very young age, actually, because my father I was a bit naughty because I was the only child. So my parents took turns to take me to work. I wasn't very good at going to creche. And when my father also had the responsibility of taking me to church on a Saturday morning because my mom would be working. So after church, we would then go to the informal settlements and would take food, but the sharing of food was not in a patronizing way or a condescending way. At no stage was I made to feel that my life is, or that I'm more special than the other people that didn't have that access. It was just a matter of sharing. But at the same time, that sharing process created a consciousness of the stark contradictions of some people really having in excess and other people having almost nothing. Look, my parents didn't have a specific career in mind for me. They just wanted me to achieve my best, to apply myself fully and to be happy and to enjoy life. The one thing that they were emphatic about, though, was for me to get a high qualification. So when I decided to drop out of my studies, I was at or let me, even before I went to university, I I became an activist at school, an anti-apartheid activist. So as a consequence, I skipped a lot of class. And there was one stage in 1986 where we had to make a decision between writing exams and supporting the struggle. So even though I was fully active politically and I was part of the protest, I went against my comrades and I wrote my exams. By the time I got to my second year in university, the contradictions in our country had become so stark that it was no longer, as much as I wanted to obey my mom, as much as I was conscious of the fact that my mom had paid for my studies, and I didn't want to disappoint her. There had come a time in our struggle for me, the choice to fight was stronger than the desire to please my mother. So I abandoned my studies for my bachelor's degree. I made up for it. Look, the decision to fight injustice, it was an easy decision because the brutality of apartheid was so stark in our country. The restrictions on our movement because of our race was so blatant that it was very difficult not to resist. So I was very, very, very young as 7, when I had within me the desire to resist already. I was 6, 7 years old when we had the 1976 uprising in South Africa, and the student protest was in every area. So that was my first exposure to police brutality. Oh, okay. Before that, I had exposure to restrictions on my movement because my father and I would accompany my father to work, and we would be forced to travel in the non-white carriage of the train. So my father was also a bit of a rebel. So he would always sit in the whites only carriage. And he would always use the whites only exit. So as a consequence, the police was always chasing us. And this when I was like 2, 3, 4 years old already. So it was natural for me to want to affirm myself as a human being and my rights as a citizen. So even by the time I was 7, when there were protests and the police were attacking kids and all the kids were throwing stones, I also threw stones. And then when we started having organized boycotts, as part of the resistance, I think it was in 1991, there was the Roundtrees boycott. But then slowly, also my teachers, as soon as I entered high school, my teachers enhanced my consciousness. So I had the advantage of being relatively articulate as a young person. And because of that, my teachers would involve me in more philanthropical activities. And that philanthropical activities deepened or heightened my political consciousness. The passion just ignited. And by the time I was 15, I was fully active politically. And for me, even now, that commitment that I made back then, it still resonates today. The fact that there's still this vast inequality gap, for me, even today, it remains unacceptable. The fact that today there's still discrimination based on skin color, which is, it's absurd and insane. For me, it's still an anomaly that needs to be fought against. That shouldn't be tolerated. So yes, my commitment started very early, and I think it's a commitment that I'm going to have until the day I die. The turning point in my life was falling pregnant. So if you come from a very religious home, then being pregnant out of wedlock is an absolute taboo, both in the church and in the family. So you go through this period of a bit of social isolation. And particularly then, because I hadn't completed my degree, I didn't have a stable job. And then to be isolated within that context, when you have and you're a single parent, you have a child to care for, it changes your seriousness about life. So before that, I was very comfortable just being an activist. And I think if I hadn't fallen pregnant, I wouldn't have been that determined to be more structured and even a slightly bit more ambitious, if I could put it so. So because I had this wonderful son that I needed to care for, I thought it's very important that I complete my degree. Because I managed to get a job as a secretary, but it wasn't paying enough for me to support my son in the way that I felt he needed to be supported. School is expensive, clothes is expensive, food is expensive. And as the secretary, as the personal assistant, I wasn't making the kind of money that I needed, and I didn't have the kind of freedom that I wanted so that I could give him enough attention and care. So it inspired me to do my degree. It inspired me to do my master's. It inspired me to want a better job. Until, you know what, hey, like I was saying, there was, besides wanting to please my mom, wanting to get the PhD was also about wanting to be a very good example for him. Wanting to be the head of department in a national government department, even to be a permanent secretary in a institution that is on the entire continent. It was inspired by me wanting to be an example for my son. Likewise, even my lifestyle. So I'm divorced, and people will say, "Oh, but you don't behave like someone that's single." And I said, "No, I have a son. I want my son to respect women. I want my son to know that he can trust women. And so I have to conduct myself in a manner that makes my son appreciate other women, so that one day when he gets married, he will not be hindered by my weaknesses in my marriage. But if he will know that no, his wife is special, and that if he treats her in a particular way, he can trust her. And even if his wife is ambitious, he doesn't need to be threatened by it, because his mom has demonstrated that she's a loyal person, that she's a good person. And so he can rely on his wife to have those qualities. As much as politics is portrayed as a very ruthless environment, we, because we come from a background of struggle, we in the past, as political activists, we used to have a very tight network, very close, very supportive, very trusting. It's just that dynamics now are changing. So that trust isn't as strong anymore, but to a large degree, that affection is still there because we have a shared history. So there are many, many, many people that have contributed to my life, at every single stage. And it is very difficult for me to isolate one or two people. But I will nonetheless proceed to say that there's been two women who have been most inspirational in my life. The one has obviously been my mom, because after my father died, she raised me on her own, and she remains a very religious person, or spiritual. And so she's very inspirational. She's there to support me. And then there was also, when I was younger, say in my early 20s, Lindiwe Sisulu, she kind of took me in, and she spent a lot of time grooming me. So for me, the effort that she put into my development, and the faith that she put into my capability to lead, I think that assisted me a lot. In fact, also because I was a single parent, I would take my child with me to work. By then, I was working for the ANC, so I would be sitting there, and my son would be sitting there next to me with his computer, and with my big computer, and with his little one. And she motivated for there to be a creche so that my son could go to creche. So, yeah, that is the one person I'm going to highlight, because there's just been so many others. So one day, when I thanked Lindy for everything that she did to me, she was saying, no, the best way to thank me is to empower other women. So as a consequence, now, I try, and every opportunity that I have, to work with young women, to empower them, to give them access to have their articles published, I'll do that. My passion is for young women, especially ones who are dynamic and feisty, because they remind me of me. And society doesn't take too kindly to women who are very assertive, very opinionated, even aggressive in their opinions. And they try to hone them down and say, can you be, slightly more submissive, slightly more feminine? So for me then, when I see women like that, I get inspired to inspire them and to remove the stumbling blocks in their lives. And, yeah. And they never failed to disappoint me. So where I could facilitate for people to get access to scholarships, I did. For us to facilitate access to jobs, it's a bit difficult because all South Africans are unemployed. So our emphasis is more on ensuring that there's a fair and just process and that everyone has access to those opportunities. But where people excel with regards to the efforts that they are themselves putting in. And I get asked, do you know of anyone who would fit this post? Then I definitely make the recommendation. Because I just think that life can be really tough, especially if you're a Black woman. Even just being Black is a challenge on its own. So I think if we can open up doors for people, if we are in the position to do that, then we should utilize those things. We should utilize the powers that we have to give access to those who otherwise would really be struggling. Yes, as I said before, we try and make the system a fair one, but there's the reality that the system has a bias, and it has a bias against Blacks, it has a bias against Black women. So while at a policy level, you try and eliminate those barriers, at an individual level, if you can assist individuals also to transcend those barriers or even to remove those barriers on their behalf so that life can just be slightly easier, I definitely try and do that. For me, the greatest level of achievement is to reach a level of contentment. As a young Black woman, I was very ambitious and driven because I thought that society has a perception that women who are appeared or who are defined to be attractive are not very intelligent. So there was a defiance in me to try and demonstrate, that I'm the cleverest in the world, that I'm the best at what I do in whichever field it is that I am in. So as a consequence, besides just wanting to excel academically, I also wanted to be the best leader in the ANC, in the party, in the SSCP. I wanted to be the best public servant in the country. So I became right up to the head of department level, So I started off as a secretary. I got my degree. I became an assistant director, a deputy director, a chief director, a deputy director general, and then the head of department. Because I was ambitious. Being the head of the department of a national department in South Africa, it wasn't enough for me. Being a central committee member, which is the highest organ of the South African Communist Party, it wasn't enough for me. I wanted to be the boss of the whole continent. So I became the permanent secretary for a continental body that looked at decentralization on the continent. And I was very bossy, so there was all these men who reported to me, many at level of director general, all these intelligent, powerful people. And I thoroughly enjoyed being the boss. So thank goodness I've grown up now. So I'm content. I'm at peace. I'm not saying, or let's say the character of my ambition has changed. My ambition now is more about using the power to effect change as opposed to wanting the power. So one thing that I'm really embarrassed about is that I am only able to speak South African languages. I'm not able to speak French. I'm not able to speak Portuguese. I was staying in Cameroon for more than 3 years. I still can't speak French. So it's a disappointment to myself because when I interact with other people, they label it as Anglophone arrogance. And if we're saying that we want to cross, especially on the continent, we want to cross these barriers that are separating us, then language is one of the tools to demonstrate a commitment to crossing those barriers. Um, so it's something that I now earnestly started working on for this year. That's my ambition for this year, to at least speak French and put the basics of French and the basics of Portuguese, so that people can see that my commitment to African unity is a sincere commitment. You know, the words of inspiration that I want to share, it's not high level at all. It's very basic to say you have to have, the most important thing is to have a dream. There are going to be many obstacles towards achieving that dream, but you have to be determined and committed. And as long as you are consistent, as long as you persevere, and you work on that dream every single day in a little way, in the long term, the impact is going to be there, and you're going to achieve that which you want to achieve. You shouldn't even allow yourself to be deterred by obstacles. And yeah, and I want to use one example, okay? We never, ever, ever thought that we're going to have liberation in South Africa. The South African apartheid army was so powerful. It was so brutal. It was so ruthless. And as young people, all that we had was our voice, and all that we had was our determination. And there were times when it was bad, like all the political parties were banned. Even our movements were restricted. I couldn't stay at home. It was almost impossible to operate politically in the country. But we continued, despite the conditions on the ground. Every single day we tried, and liberation was attained. And so I'm thinking that's a high level goal, but there's the little ones. I'll tell you, I don't have an acumen for Portuguese or for foreign languages. That's why I didn't learn anything. But what I'm doing is I'm learning 3 words a day. And over time, if you have the goal, you work on it, you do little bits every single day, you'll be surprised that at the end of it, that big product that you want, that is the one then that you achieve. The one thing that really, really inspires me is to see young people achieve their dreams. Growing up in South Africa and seeing the obstacles that many young people face, and then seeing the determination to succeed despite that obstacles, and then succeeding, that makes me incredibly happy. You know, even on the continent, I'm still active on the continent in various platforms. So we have initiatives where we allow young people to express their voices, express their opinions, to share with us innovation. And every time I see a young person being assertive, you know, we come from an era where we were not allowed to assert ourselves. So when we see young people now being assertive, being leaders, wanting to take responsibility for rectifying all the wrongs in the world and for making the world a better place, it truly, truly, truly inspires me. For me to see young Black South Africans wanting to achieve makes me feel that all the sacrifices that I made in the struggle against apartheid, it makes me feel like it was so worth it. Hey, I think that if we didn't fight apartheid, if we didn't at least remove the legislative barriers, the the young people today wouldn't have the opportunities that they are enjoying today. So I feel a bit proud about my generation and the generation before me's contributions. Of course, now we're saying those structural barriers in our economy that is inhibiting the success of young people, those structural barriers must be removed so that young people can truly reach their full potential. One thing that really, really, really pains me is war, civil war on our continent. It impedes development. It robs us of valuable human capital. Um, it hinders people from achieving their goals and their dreams. It inhibits us from having a peaceful and loving society. And it really angers me when leaders so quickly resort to war to resolve their problems. Because it's a war of the elite. It's not the war of the masses. I was in a country about 2 weeks ago where the president, because he was afraid that he's going to lose his position of power, he decided to seize a conference that was going to take place because he thought the conference was going to remove him. But it was such severe security aggression that was imposed on just a conference. And when the people naturally wanted to rebel, he didn't hesitate to want to use force to contain this natural resistance of people to protest against something that was wrong. When I moved outside of that immediate environment and I started to interact with the people, I could see that the president's determination to stop this conference from happening was not a desire of the ordinary citizens of their country. All that the citizens there wanted was good governance. All they wanted was to be with their families, to work, to be happy, to contribute. And the fight for power was a fight that was singularly concentrated in the mind of the president. And for me, that this guy was willing to risk civil war to consolidate his own power base, it just didn't make sense. And sadly, for me, that irrational grasp or determination to hold onto power at the expense of lives, at the expense of development, at the expense of progress, at the cost, at such a high cost, for me, it is completely irrational. So I want to appeal to all people who are up in positions of power. One, please, man, can you just serve your people? That's all that's asked for. And secondly, can you not kill them? It is completely unjustified. My passion is political stability. So I'm thinking one of the mechanisms to facilitate political stability is to build trust between government and the people. And now we have cell phones. So I don't see why we use the cell phone for social media, to interact with each other as individuals. I don't see why we can't use the cell phone as a mechanism to build trust between government and the people. So my short-term project is to convince governments on the continent to use cell phone technology to improve their communication with people, to use the cell phone as a platform for people to express their complaints, to use the cell phone as a platform to communicate back to people what they are doing about those complaints, but also to share information generally around what government is doing, to alert people of any dangers that might be experienced, but also given the vast levels or the inequality in terms of development, there's no reason why we can't use the cell phone as a mechanism to facilitate education, to access to education to all, access to healthcare. interacting with many leaders on the continent. I'm so privileged that I have access to many presidents of political parties because of the virtue of my position in the South African Communist Party. And so because of our regular interaction, we're starting to establish a network of engagement, a network to see how we can support each other as political leaders, but then also to use that platform to say, let us look at other mechanisms of resolving problems that we might have at a domestic level. Instead of resorting to war, because no one is benefiting from it. That's the long term. In the medium term also, and it's slightly academic, I did say that I want to complete this PhD to please my mom. So I'm looking at the configuration of public administration and how we can structure the public service in such a manner that it facilitates enhanced development, but also enhanced peace. So that if you're having various ethnic tribes feeling that they are excluded, as much as I'm non-racial and I don't believe in these ethnic barriers, there's the reality that sometimes that people use ethnicity as a justification for war. So I'm thinking, how can we structure the constitutions of countries in such a manner that all communities feel that they are included, that all communities feel that they have a voice, that all communities feel that they have a fair access to power and economic resources. Yeah, that's my objectives. And I think that is what will drive me until the day I die. At this stage in my life, because I'm almost 50, success means contentment. Yeah. I think if you can be comfortable with who you are, if you can appreciate everything about yourself, and accept that what you have today is enough, then you have achieved success. Love your neighbor as you love yourself. Yes. I try to, there's this quote in the Bible where it says, love is patient, love is kind, love is not easily angered. I try to emulate those elements. I'm not always very good. When I see wrong things, I can really lose my temper. But in general, that's what I try to practice. But for me, that doesn't just translate in a superficial manner. Because if you're saying you want to love your neighbor, then it also translates into social justice and economic justice. So it's not just at an individual level, it's also at a systemic level. It's not just then confined to the individual or to a country or to a continent. It then becomes a global effort. And so that is what I try to emulate through everything that I do. It's a bit of a contradiction, because in terms of my personality, what I know is that I'm an introvert, I'm quiet, I'm shy, I'm very serious, I'm very disciplined, I'm very firm. That's how I perceive myself. The way other people perceive me is that I'm very warm. They think I'm very soft. Yes. In fact, that's a complaint of many people. They think that I'm too sweet, I'm allowing myself to be manipulated. But I think that is a perception that society attributes to women, that they think that because the way women are projected is the way that there's this projection of sweetness, that sweetness and strength are a contradiction. They're not. You can be very strong, you can be very firm, you can be very disciplined, but you can also be very respectful, you can also be very humble. So, and that is something I want to be remembered for having the capacity to respect and appreciate absolutely everyone. And because I'm respecting and appreciating everyone, to have the capacity to fight for the right for everyone to be respected. Ethical people. I think I've had great privilege of being surrounded by people who are ethical, you know, um, by people who have power, but to use that power for good. So, and I'm inspired. There are these few individuals who are just wonderful human beings, and I marvel at the fact that I have the privilege to know them. One of them, again, as I said earlier, is my mom. She's a warm, kind, ethical person, and all the friends that I have are exactly the same. So they inspire me. And then, of course, I get my inspiration from spirituality. So I spend a lot of time meditating. I spend a lot of time being quiet, harnessing the spirituality within me, because I think it is very difficult to be a person of integrity if your spiritual base is not very strong. My message to other single parents is that, one, having an unplanned thing, firstly, giving birth to a child always is a privilege, no matter what the circumstances. And enjoy that privilege. Enjoy everything about the child, the tantrums, the naughtiness, just appreciate every aspect of life of that kid. But also, don't ever think that having an unplanned pregnancy means that you can't achieve your dreams. It is completely possible. It just requires slightly more effort. It requires slightly more discipline. It requires slightly more structure. But you can continue to study. There are bursaries available. It just means that you have to get up a bit earlier when your child is asleep so that you can complete your studies. It doesn't mean that once you have completed your studies, you can't advance in your career. Most places now have childcare facilities. Where there are not childcare facilities, it then becomes incumbent on you to advocate for it, because in today's age, it's no longer acceptable that women cannot have a career and enjoy being mothers. Then, most importantly, don't waste your energy pursuing money from the father, pursuing attention from the father, pursuing love from the father. If the father gives it, oh, great, fantastic, wonderful. In fact, create a platform. Don't deny the other parent access to the child, because children need both parents to develop. But if the person is not available, you are equally competent in succeeding on your own. You don't waste energy pursuing negativity. It's just not worth it. But also, you don't want to translate that negative energy to your child. You want to create a warm, loving, caring, positive environment for your child. And you can only do that if you have achieved inner peace. You have achieved inner peace, and you have made efforts to achieve your own goals and dreams. So my message to Gold, I was saying that many young people are lacking role models. And because there's this lack of role models, they don't feel inspired, and that is why they easily become despondent, and that is why some of them even consider suicide. And so the fact that Gold is creating a platform which showcases role models, it's just absolutely phenomenal. It is so important. It's role models not just for society, but also role models for young people, role models for kids. So what I'm wishing for Gold is, I wish that you get the necessary exposure, that you don't just get exposure on one channel, but that you become a global phenomenon, so that the effort that you had put into the conceptualization and even the formulation of a quality product, that effort doesn't just benefit a few individuals, but that it benefits society as a whole. I really think that you're doing such a great job, and it's a job that should be shared with the entire world. And I know you're keen to succeed. 4 major things that you need to succeed in life or to get your goal is, firstly, to have a goal, and then to be disciplined in terms of working towards it, to be respectful of all that you encounter in the process, and to be grateful for each little gain that you make towards achieving it. I wish you all the best. Gold is yours. Really committed suicide.
Are you serious?
Including his cousin, who was almost like a brother to him. And it's precisely that thing that young people become despondent. They think there's no hope for them. They're under so much pressure to be successful. They're under so much pressure to achieve.
No patience.
The definition of success, however, is so materialistic that they can't see that just the fact that they are alive, the fact that they are truly engagements with others, they're indirectly an inspiration already. That in itself is a success. The fact that they haven't succumbed to the temptations of drugs, that there's other evil things that are out there. The fact that they were not caught up in those things, that in its own is an achievement.
It's an achievement.
You know, it's shameful for me when people think that they are failures just because they don't measure other people's standards, and then they kill themselves because of it. Yeah. The one person, he committed suicide because he didn't pass his degree. As if that would matter to his parents. Really? He can always rewrite his exam. Where is the sense in him taking his life? Another one took his life because he couldn't get a job. He was already 25. He couldn't get a job. He'd been applying and applying. He'd been unemployed for more than 3-4 years. And the peer pressure, you know, other people were getting jobs, people were getting married, people were having kids. And he thought that he's disappointing his parents. So he committed suicide. So it was devastating, really.
I understand, and that is why we're putting up this show. But I hope I've not spoiled your feelings.
No. I was saying that is why I admire what you're doing, you know, because you're giving hope to others. When people think that there's no hope, that they regard themselves as failure, but through your show, they will learn that everyone has struggled. Everyone has come through tough times. Everyone has at some occasion failed. But we've used our failures to build us, to inspire us, and not to hold us back. And definitely committing suicide is not something that we had considered. No.
It's not.